Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, April 7th, 2023. Time for a dentist appointment, as it turns out. Not for me, but right after the show. So time for a lot of things, including that show I was just mentioning. So, let's get to it. It's Friday. It's Good Friday. Oh, yes, right. Every year I think about this. I think about this all year except for on Good Friday, and I say, every time I get on a Friday and I want to say Good Friday morning to everybody, and then I say, oh, no, wait, it's not Good Friday yet, and now it is, and now's our chance. Hey, Good Friday morning to everybody. It doesn't feel any different, just like your birthday. I don't feel any older, and this Friday doesn't feel any better than any of the rest of them yet, although I suppose those of you who might be celebrating Good Friday, maybe it'll feel better once you get out there, and I don't know. What do? Get to church, I assume. Okay, well, I hope that works out. I don't know what the crossover of the audience in this audience that then says, time to actually hit the church for Good Friday. But if you're doing it, Good Friday to you, and if you're not, well, just a regular Good Friday to you, not capitalized. Okay, well, lots to catch up on, of course, and many different directions to go. One of the best things about a Good Friday like this, the only way to make it better is to have company, and I don't have any. But I do have virtual company in the form of our good friend Darwin Darko and Rosalind McGregor. Both have sent in recorded segments. They've been sitting in the wings and waiting because there's so much news happening. Friday is a great day to include them, and a good time to take a couple minutes off and I don't know what, do a lap around the house, drink some tea, do something like that. Always appreciate a break, and a break from my own voice. I mean, my own voice is always rattling around in my head anyway, so it's nice to hear a different one. It's probably the same for you every once in a while, so we treat you to it later on today. But first, we'll catch up on, an hour and 50 minutes worth of other stuff. Well, mix in. I got 10 minutes of recorded segments to work in, and we'll make sure you hear those later on. So, all right, what happened yesterday? Well, it was Thursday, and you know how that goes. Thursday was the day that the Tennessee state legislature, the state house, had set aside to do their dirty work and deal with the absolutely bonkers expulsion resolutions against the three Tennessee Democrats who had the gall to disrupt the session on, was it on Monday? Did they do it on Monday? Was it a couple days before then? I think this was a very fast-moving train, this thing. And at any rate, yes, they had their preliminary votes the other day. Thursday was the day they actually considered, all right, will we expel these people or not? And I say it pointedly, will we expel these people or not? Because, as you know, there were three members who joined in this protest and were thus admonished and threatened with expulsion. Two younger black men who were members of the House, and one white woman who, I don't know for sure what her age is, but the two black men appear to be extremely young, and I think are among the youngest members of the House. And the white woman with them, not as young, but I hate to say that because I know people get sensitive about age things, and it's not nice, but I started down this path and now I'm stuck on it. Anyway, the point is, they A, all have names, and B, had some different outcomes. Tennessee Republicans, I am informed by the embedded tweet from the Associated Press that is in this front page Daily Kos piece from Walter Einenkel, who says, he shows us the tweet. The tweet says, Representatives Justin Jones, are they both Justin? And Justin Pearson are expelled from the state legislature. And guess what? the legislature declined by one vote, if that makes any difference, to expel Gloria Johnson. And so the optics are terrific, don't you think? It went so well. You know how white male Republicans are about young black men. They think they're the biggest threat in the world, unless they're also drag queens, in which case I guess they would be a larger threat. I guess if they're Chinese lab worker drag queens, then forget about it. You never know how bad things are going to get then. So the Republicans gave themselves and availed themselves of the opportunity to be seen expelling the two black guys and letting the white lady slide. I mean, she got admonished and it wasn't great, but they didn't remove her from her seat. That's pretty incredible. And I saw a lot of people, of course, observing that. It was just really interesting to watch people say, look at the optics of this. This is outrageous. And remember that this is the same party, the Republican Party, that the leadership, as they called it, of which would not send the National Guard to the Capitol in Washington, D.C., not the Capitol in Tennessee, but the Capitol in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, 2021, because of the optics. We were worried about the optics of having military personnel suppress free expression of ideas and First Amendment activity. Of course, this was an actual assault on the Capitol, and they were smashing the windows and looking to steal the Electoral College ballots and kidnap members of Congress and possibly murder them. That's what the chant was saying anyway. And you know how we are about chants, and that's why, of course, we have to expel these members from Tennessee. They chanted too, and so therefore it's an insurrection as bad, if not worse, than January 6th. But suddenly the worry about optics is out the window. And that, of course, is because to Republicans, the optics of throwing black men out of something where white men gather is great. And in Tennessee, I guess it's fantastic. So that's what they went ahead and did. And I don't know what else to tell you about it. And so I'll let Walter Einenkel tell you about it, I guess, and then we'll comment along there. Tennessee Republicans have expelled two young black lawmakers. He says they're young, too. They are young. And failed to expel, although I consider it a success. And so does Walter, obviously. But anyway, failed to expel their white compatriot, if they consider her to be a compatriot at all. This, of course, all for protesting gun violence. I don't know. They should have shot him, I guess. That would have been more in keeping with what was going on. Let's see. These are, I'm reading a caption of things that don't belong. All right. Skipping down a little bit. Oh, look, embedded here is the tweet from the Tennessee Holler, the, I think, fairly liberal and progressive publication, that I occasionally read from on the show. And by the way, I think they're in trouble too with Tennessee Republicans. And I think, if I heard correctly, the publisher or editor or some, sort of chieftain or official or shaman from the Tennessee Holler has been the victim of another gun violence attack. Someone shot up his house, in the middle of the night, which is becoming a weird and trendy way for Republican activists in some of these areas to express their displeasure and their love of the Second Amendment and of the First for themselves and hatred of it for you. But anyway, that's another story which I haven't set aside, and I guess I should go looking for that one. But the Tennessee Holler, when they're not ducking bullets, tweeted that here some video of Jones and Pearson battling on the floor, in his own defense, this time with a representative farmer who says the tweet describes his belittling, disrespectful rant. So anyway, you should go and take a look at what's embedded in the story there. The video was rather interesting and, infuriating in many ways. And by the way, Jones and Pearson and the Justins, the Pearson and, I have to scroll back, Jones, it's a little confusing. There's a Jones, there's a Johnson. It's not easy with names like that. I'm pretty sure I'm getting it wrong when I'm like Jones, right? Johnson. Oh, and it is Jones and Johnson. Anyway, some really terrific oration too from the two of them. I imagine that's to be expected, given that they've been elected at such a young age. They must have some real oratorical gifts. Usually will lead to that kind of outcome in an early election like that. Anyway, I guess there's not much besides bits and pieces of commentary here, but this is a great collection. There's nothing to read to you, that is, but there's a great collection of tweets embedded here that have video included, so you'll get some sense of what the scene was like down there. It's really, I mean, there's not much more to say about it other than how incredible it is. And it's been real interesting watching the story sort of develop, too. Between this and the Clarence Thomas story, it's been a really good week for that weird effect, the illusion, I guess, if you're being honest, the illusion of Kagro in the morning bringing you the news before anyone else. And it's not, as I've had to, confess a number of times, it's not that I'm out there burning shoe leather to bring you these stories. I'm reading and collecting the stories and then sharing them. And usually on the day they're published, they make their way into my view via social media. And I say, let's talk about it. And very often I'm the first person you're hearing talking about it because you haven't had your coffee and read the newspaper yet. So it seems like we're breaking the news, and then all of a sudden, we're popularizing this fantastic story that everybody needs to hear about. But in general, they are fantastic stories that everybody needed to hear about, and that's why the reporters who reported on them reported the way they did. And then, I don't know, we give it a nice boost, and we certainly share it on social media. But those stories, I think, were destined for the top headlines right from the get-go. Where were we? Oh, yes, right. So the Tennessee story, the only real update there is they made it worse in the only way possible by expelling the two black men and letting the white woman slide by. It was interesting, too. I saw some clips of the Republican legislators there were justifying their actions in a way by saying, well, look, we're just really, upset with this, and it was a terrible thing, and yada, yada. I mean, I don't know where they get the idea. I'd love to sit down and hear them try and reason through why their protest was as bad, if not worse, than January 6th. But I have a feeling we'd all just be frustrated by that. But listening to them justify things by saying, well, look, we're expelling them, but that doesn't mean they can never come back. If the voters of their districts choose to return them to office, then we'll welcome them back here as full and equal members. Of course, they'll have lost some seniority along the way. But, that's how open and fair-minded we are. They can come back if they just win election again and spend a bunch of money to get elected. And, I think they'll probably find that that's exactly what happens. I imagine this will only increase their popularity in their districts and might even launch them into a state Senate campaign one day. I don't know how badly gerrymandered the state Senate is versus the state House, but I don't think there's anything to prevent them from coming back. I know that there's nothing procedurally that prevents them from coming back. They're not banned from office for life yet. I guess that's a possibility. They may follow that up with legislation that says if you are expelled from the House and your name is Justin, you can never come back. It's a pretty narrowly tailored bill. They might pass that. They have a supermajority. I don't want to give them any ideas, but they've probably already thought of that idea. So anyway, I just found the whole thing fascinating. And when the story broke, silly old me, I thought, no, that's crazy. I know that they'd love to threaten such things, but they'll never follow through. They did. They followed through and they did it. And as I've mentioned during the week, that's not the only place that they've been doing this sort of thing and getting ready to abuse power. I mentioned yesterday, but I didn't read Why don't we just stick around Daily Kos and read a bunch of their stuff today? We have a historical tie there. I mentioned yesterday that Laura Clausen had written this story up. We talked about the story, but let's read her narrative of it. Republicans threaten frivolous prosecutions of prominent Democrats in retaliation for Trump charges. Prosecution, of course, one of those places where you're not even really supposed to hint that you're doing things as political retaliation. It's supposed to be, and if anything, it's supposed to be wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and a quiet one to your friends about it. And then you're supposed to deny to the press that it has anything to do with it. It's not retaliation. This is just the law is the law. What can you do? We found this evidence. We had to follow it wherever it took us. Just so happens that the law has, come down like a ton of bricks against the guy who screwed with us just last week. But this time, Republicans have gotten it in their head, and Donald Trump has helped them come to this position that the things that they always sort of believed that TV politicians did or would do are real things, and that they ought to do them too. And never mind, the structure of democracy, because they never really paid attention to that. Democracy is about, you have an election, and then when you win, you're all powerful, and you can do whatever you want until they impeach you or defeat you at the ballot box. And then if they defeat you at the ballot box, you throw out the electoral college votes and take power anyway. Because, presidency, commander-in-chief, yada, yada. All right, so what are they up to? You know the background of it already, but let's fill in the blanks. One of the key Republican responses to the criminal charges against Donald Trump comes in the form of a threat. What a surprise, she says. Very clever there. The argument goes like this. Each step dripping with its own form of dishonesty. Okay, that's an extra description of the argument and how it will go. District Attorney Alvin Bragg's charges against Trump are, of course, in their mind, purely political, and or Trump should simply be above the law. There is that split among Republicans. One part of the Republican Party says this is an outrage. The thing that he did is bad, but charging him for it is purely political. And then there's another faction that says, no, the thing that he did is good, and charging him for it is insane. And both deserve political retaliation in their minds. So they come back together. It doesn't really matter. Right? They come together as a coalition on the other side saying, well, obviously, the only thing to do about this is to corrupt the system even further. So, therefore, a reasonable response would be for local prosecutors in Republican areas to cook up charges against prominent Democrats. And they don't all have to be Biden. And by the way, this is not novel either. If you think about it, I think within memory of the airing of this show, but of course this show's been on the air for 200 years. So, it's a while now. But, what was the name of the guy? Well, we know the name of the villain in this. Karl Rove was involved in a similar situation, encouraging local, well, let's see, there was the U.S. Attorney's scandal where, of course, you would only get a job as a U.S. Attorney at the, after being appointed to the job by George W. Bush, if you promised to try to dig up like voter fraud type charges, and use them against Democrats and various other charges. Whatever it is you wanted to, whatever you came up with was good. But we were also hoping for a larger narrative about voter fraud, et cetera, et cetera. And it's funny, too, because Karl Rove kind of landed somewhere in the never Trump camp, if not firmly in the middle of it. And yet, I don't know whether he's acknowledged his role in raising the central issue of Trumpism to its prominent place. I mean, he very definitely did launch a coordinated effort to hand to Republicans as part of their candidate in a box, campaign in a box toolkit, the accusation that wherever you are, Democrats are definitely participating in and orchestrating voter fraud, and that's why they sometimes win elections. And if you're a Republican and they happen to have won your election, well, then you can undo it all by talking about how unfair and cheater-like they are. And what do you know? Lo and behold, that stuck and hung around and transformed just a little bit, not very much really, on the voter fraud front, into something that sent Republicans into a crazed rage on January 6th, and therefore, yada yada, expel 2 young Democratic black lawmakers from Tennessee. You see that, it makes total logical sense. Anyway, what I was thinking of, though, in particular, was Don Siegelman, the last elected Democratic governor of Alabama. Is that right? Okay. And that he orchestrated all sorts of targeted prosecutions against Siegelman with the idea of destroying him as a statewide elected power in Alabama. And, that was probably going to be a fairly easy thing to do, just because Alabama is Alabama, and they were primed to believe bad things at that point. And now they're definitely primed to believe bad things about Democrats, whatever it is, and however stupid. But anyway, yeah, this has actually been going on for quite a while. The idea that a reasonable response would be for local prosecutors in Republican areas to cook up charges against prominent Democrats. Just want to sort of talk about how long that's been going on. And there's probably, if any of you are using the KITM hashtag or email or some sort of methodology for contacting me in the middle of the show, or if you're listening to this via podcast later on today, you'll do that later and say, no, it's even older than that. And it is. That's true. And it's got its roots in Nixonism too. Of course, then we existed in the framework of sort of this mutual understanding between all the parties that wasn't something that was done, and it was so taboo, even though it probably really happened. But it was so taboo and so shameful to be seen doing it that we didn't even bother to write a law and put up a law on the books that says it was illegal, because of course it was, until finally it all broke out into the open under Nixon. And then we said, all right, apparently we're going to have to write this down, that you can't use the FBI and the IRS to target your political enemies from now on. And by the way, that's what led to Donald Trump's weird confusion about the $18 million thing, which I have something else to add on this. A very stream of consciousness show today. All right, let's see. So I'm just trying to keep an eye out for anybody yelling, no, Nixon, and nobody has done it yet, but maybe you knew it was coming. All right. So what the hell are we doing again? Yes, right. Reading Laura Clausen and the story of the trumped-up charges that are on the way. Okay, back to that. Democrats, of course, the claim is, have forced Republicans to fight dirty for 50-plus years, I guess. Here's the House Oversight Committee Chair, James Comer, on Fox News. And we mentioned this the other day, and I mentioned that it was James Comer, and I said, I can't remember, is he, he's the chair of something. Was it the Oversight Committee? Well, it is the Oversight Committee. I can't remember I wondered whether it was or not. And he said, I'll tell you, I don't know what his accent, if he has one, sounds like. I'll tell you one of the things that I don't think's been picked up a lot that's going to be a problem, he's telling Fox News. I had 2 calls yesterday, one from a county attorney in Kentucky and one from a county attorney in Tennessee. They were Republican, obviously. He actually says that, obviously. That's funny. He hasn't even gotten to what the threat is yet. Like, if he told me what the threat was, well, we'll prosecute Biden for something, I would say, sound like Republicans. Of course, what he's saying is they're county attorneys from Kentucky and Tennessee. So, of course, they're Republicans. Although, there are Democrats in those states. Anyway, they were Republican, obviously. Both states are heavily Republican, but not every county is. They want to know if there are ways they can go after the Bidens now. They've opened a can of worms. They've set precedents now that we can't go back on. Of course, you can go back on anything you want. You make the rules. just say, all right, it's a precedent, but we're not going to use it. Or let's overturn it as a precedent because that's the right thing to do. But of course, instead they say, I know, why don't we do more wrong things? You know what's a great way to show somebody that something's wrong? Do it over and over again. That will that'll learn them. Anyway, well, they're very stupid people and vindictive people at that, which, by itself isn't stupid necessarily. I mean, I don't know. I flatter myself to think that I'm kind of a little smarter than these guys, but I'm also very vindictive. I just want to warn you of that. Anyway, the quote, one of the things that I don't think's been picked up on a lot part, Laura points out, is particularly funny since a lawyer whose firm represents some Trump advisors made exactly this argument in the New York Times last week when it was just as dishonest as it is coming from Comer. And then, of course, arguably Republicans have made the same threats since forever, but specifically county attorneys charging the Bidens, right? I don't think it's been picked up on a lot. Well, I think it's been printed in the New York Times. So, whatever. Anyway, but that's their way of saying, wink, wink, nudge, nudge a little bit, right? That's actually kind of a Trumpian line. Not a lot of people are talking about this. And I don't know if anybody knows this, but the United States is independent from Britain and has been since 1776. Oh, really? Thank you for bringing that up. He does that a lot when something has come to his attention for the first time ever. So maybe that's what Comer was saying. Well, anyway, the can of worms, of course, is only opened up if you take for granted that Bragg's prosecution was purely political. And even if you grant that, it's a big stretch given the documentation on offer. Bragg is the prosecutor where Trump did the thing that is allegedly a crime. How is a local prosecutor in Kentucky or Tennessee going to tie any Bidens to alleged crimes in their county? Wow, it has to be related to us? I didn't know that. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. Hey, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just taking a quick break off the mic there. All right, so I was a little bit late back to it. Never mind. Okay, one of the things that I guess county attorneys in Kentucky and Tennessee are just now discovering, I guess it was never relevant to their lives because they weren't actually practicing law in any way or didn't have to pay attention in law school. It really doesn't matter. Graduate last in your class. If you get elected county attorney, voila, you're county attorney. So it doesn't really make any difference whether you remember from law school that having jurisdiction over the crime requires that there be some logical nexus, some connection to the locality, to the jurisdiction in which you're bringing the charges. Of course, this is something that Republicans don't know or has fallen out of favor with Republicans anyway. see the whole story about judge shopping and how many times, say, the state of Texas alone has sued to stop federal policy by filing their lawsuits in Amarillo, Texas, where they're guaranteed to get, right, Judge Matthew Kaczmarek, and therefore get their way. And what did I read the other day about this? I think in the 2 years that Biden's been in office, that they've filed suit something like 7 times already in Amarillo, Texas alone, not to mention a few of the other single judge jurisdictions in Texas and in Louisiana. And that something like 26 times that the state of Texas has decided to file suit against the federal government. But out of those 26 times in the 2 years that they've sued, I mean, in 2 years that Biden's been in office, 26 lawsuits or something like that being filed, but 7 of them alone in Amarillo for this one judge. In other words, it's not popular among Republican prosecutors, this idea that there needs to be a direct nexus to the jurisdiction in which you're filing. You can get away with it in the federal cases that they're bringing because, of course, they're looking for an injunction against nationally effective federal legislation. So presumably, certainly with a friendly court, you can get away with the idea that, it affects this tiny corner of Texas just the same as any other corner of Texas or any other state, so why not? The idea, though, here is, we're going to file criminal charges against Biden. And I guess, their theory is probably twofold. One, if we get a friendly judge, and of course we'll get a friendly judge because we're filing here in Kentucky and Tennessee, they'll just rule in our favor even though it doesn't make any damn sense whatsoever. And then remember that their theory is probably something along the lines of, Joe Biden is a communist, and communism is bad, and being a communist president is a crime against the Constitution somehow, and we have a Constitution even here in Tennessee, and so therefore he's being a criming criminal right here in Tennessee, so there you go. And I mean, that's, I guess, all they really need. Well, Hunter Biden's laptop was in the newspaper here in Tennessee, so we have a nexus to the crime. All right. It doesn't really matter. I mean, more to the point, I guess, if you really want to understand the whole, nexus and jurisdiction question, why is Alvin Bragg filing this case? For instance, you might say to yourself, if you were a skeptical type of guy and maybe you have a pipe and you're smoking the pipe and stroking your beard and saying, well, this Stormy Daniels thing, that happened in Lake Tahoe, right? So why the jurisdiction in Manhattan when the crime happened in Lake Tahoe, which is where is Lake Tahoe? Anyway, Nevada? All right. I don't really know, actually, where Lake Tahoe is. I'm going to have to look that up just to be sure that I know what I'm talking about. Of course, no one will tell me directly. There we go. Straddles the border of California and Nevada. There you go. So if you're making your way across Lake Tahoe, east to west or west to east, you can cross between the states. Wow. All right. Well, Nevada, at least we got that part right. So why not bring the suit there? And I don't know where the city of Lake Tahoe is. There a city? Is it just a lake? Where's the golf course? I don't know. It doesn't matter. The point is it's not Manhattan. But then again, it's also the case that it's the crime for which he's being charged isn't having sex with Stormy Daniels. That's not a crime. Though having sex with Donald Trump is something of a crime, if you ask me. But again, we're not charging Stormy Daniels here. So, no, that wasn't the crime. The crime, of course, has to do with the payment and the cover-up, and all of that was arranged in New York. And in fact, it is alleged arranged from Trump Tower, which is in Manhattan, which is why Alvin Bragg has jurisdiction. And in addition, of course, he's charging schemes to defraud state and federal taxation authorities about the way this money was being moved and what it was for. And then, of course, the campaign finance crime component of it, which you could say, well, those things, the crime there is against, I don't know, the IRS and the FEC, and they're in Washington, D.C. Shouldn't they have jurisdiction? Well, if the FEC was the one bringing the charges, they could file their case in Washington. But that's not what's happening. And instead, the nexus that they're alleging here is that all of this was plotted from offices in Manhattan, and therefore the Manhattan District Attorney has jurisdiction. Manhattan courts have jurisdiction to hear this case, and that's the sort of nexus you're looking for. And so the big question here is, in Kentucky, in Tennessee, is there any way you can say Joe Biden committed this crime here, in the sense that we can charge him for that here? You might be able to sue for damages in a civil case if you think you've been, adversely affected by actions of the administration or of Joe Biden in particular. But again, the courts there, if to the extent that they're serious courts and care about things, and it's never really quite obvious when a Republican judge sits whether or not they do, then you would have to demonstrate that nexus. That's the big difference. Anyway, back to Laura Clausen, whose thoughts were organized ahead of time. She wrote, but note the lack of pretense that this is about anything but retaliation. That's the point that Sherrilyn Ifill was making when we read about this story the other day. There's the cursory gesture at regret that precedents have been set, quote, that we can't go back on, which is never true. But that's in defense of a claim that this is a precedent for things it is not a precedent for. Michael Cohen went to prison for his role in this scheme, and the Trump Justice Department worked to avert further investigations. Whether Bragg can make the case that what Trump personally did was a violation of New York criminal law remains to be seen. Again, Trump's lawyers will have the chance to aggressively defend their client, which they seem to be doing all the time because he seems to do lots of crimes. But the charges against Trump are a far cry from a Kentucky county attorney saying, can I go after the Bidens for something? Comer, remember, was whining about the lack of a prosecution of Beau Biden. Beau, not even Hunter. Beau Biden. Before Bragg indicting Trump seemed to be a serious likelihood. Is that right, Beau Biden? I'm going to click on that and make sure that that's the story. Top Republican whines that Biden's son hasn't been indicted. No, not Hunter, the other one. This is right from March, the beginning of March of this year. And Beau Biden, of course, is dead. What was the... do I even want to know what the charges are? No, for now, suffice to say that this idiot not only blurts out that, Republican county attorneys all over the country are looking to retaliate illegally against the Bidens, who have nothing to do with what's going on anyway. But not only that, but I also think it would be an awesome idea to charge the dead Biden son with something, too. Why not do that? Wow. All right. Well, Comer wasn't the only one making this threat. I don't know. The Biden one? Or a different one. Appearing on Fox News, former George W. Bush official Ari Fleischer, was even more explicit about it as a threat and as retaliation. And I just to be clear, was he talking about indicting a Biden, or was he talking about Beau Biden here? Fox News' Ari Fleischer. Let's see. Here's what I hope happens, Sean. I hope conservative prosecutors in rural areas of America indict Bill Clinton, indict Hillary Clinton, indict Hunter Biden. So he's left Beau out of this. But here, Ari Fleischer, because he's such a responsible type of establishment figure, says, yes, I actually hope that we pervert the justice system so that there are retaliatory strikes against people who Republicans don't like. Now, they've been trying to indict Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Hunter Biden in any jurisdiction they can think of for, in the case of the Clintons, 20, 30 years now, and not having a great deal of success with it. But, I guess Ari's allowed to continue to hope. he will continue to hope. I wouldn't allow it myself, but there's not a whole lot I can do about it. Anyway, let's see. What we were saying, Fleischer was even more explicit about it in his threat. Let's see. One of the raps, I guess, is this going to be the Fleischer thing here? Yeah. One of the raps against Donald Trump is that he violates the norms, and as a result, the Democrats had no choice. Prosecutors had no choice. But Sean, what's happened to Donald Trump is actually the real violation of the norms, Fleischer said. He's incredible. I mean, I will say this. He's a lot better spoken than most of the Trump spokespeople. He does, in the game of sleight of hand, I mean, well, Trump's working with really small hands, and I guess all of his people must have that problem too, and they're not great at it. And Fleischer is actually, measurably better at this kind of spin, which I guess makes it all the more infuriating. I mean, it's still dumb and baseless and illogical, but it's more, I don't know, it's more artful in a way, infuriating as well. Well, anyway, so the real violation of the norms is against Donald Trump, I see. Touching on and lying about the impeachments of Trump and framing Bragg's prosecution as wholly political. The implication is that no amount of wrongdoing by Trump could justify Democrats taking action against him. The reaction to Trump's actions will always be the more profound violation of norms. Then Fleischer moved on to the retaliation part. Here's what I hope happens, right? Indict Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Hunter Biden. Their only way and return to the, I guess the only way to return to the norms is for one side to realize that if they go too far, the other will match them. That was always the norm, though. Anyway, and that is not the way we settle our disputes in America. They should be settled at the ballot box. Well, I mean, you could just try to do that then. But, apparently you think that the real answer is, although the way we are supposed to solve our disputes is at the ballot box, we're not going to do that. We think we should solve them elsewhere, which is the opposite of what you say. Okay, whatever. Anyway, but Republicans cannot unilaterally disarm. You can't let them try to interfere in the 2024 election by doing to Donald Trump what they're doing. And I say that as somebody who will criticize Donald Trump when he goes too far. Oh, yeah. The Democrats are violating the norms, and they're especially doing it through this weak case in Manhattan. Well, I guess anybody you find paying the National Enquirer to cover up their affairs with porn stars, I guess it would be a fair game. You should go ahead and do that. But, we'll come up with something else. I don't know why that's supposed to be workable. Anyway, closing things out here, we'll let Laura wrap it up. Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Republicans are also complaining that the crimes Trump is charged with should have passed the statute of limitations, but Fleischer wants local prosecutors reaching back to, the 1990s to get Bill Clinton? And it seems safe to assume that if the Justice Department under Trump could not find any way to lock her up, well, then there's nothing to prosecute Hillary Clinton for. Maybe Hunter Biden went on a bender in a county with a Republican prosecutor sometime, but this is a ridiculous idea unless you're solely motivated by revenge, which Fleischer can confidently assume his audience on Sean Hannity's show is. Fleischer, as a Republican of the Karl Rove school, also knows that projection is the way to go. Accusing Democrats of trying to interfere in the 2024 election to distract from the fact that Trump's alleged crimes are about an effort to cover up his sexual encounters until after the 2016 election, and shifting the burden of violating the norms from Trump onto Democrats. But we're not talking about norms here. We're talking about laws and whether Trump broke them. Republicans cannot be allowed to shift the question from where it belongs. Can the Manhattan DA prove that Trump broke the law and get a jury to convict him? To these outlandish can of worms retaliation schemes. There are enough ambitious Republican prosecutors in this country that if they thought they could get a court to allow them to charge Bill or Hillary Clinton or Hunter Biden with a crime, they would already have done it. This isn't a serious threat of legal action. It's a media strategy. And it's the media's job, outside of Fox News, which obviously is pushing it, to ensure that it fails to gain traction. And Yeah, that's true. Although I will issue this warning. It's not, ordinarily I would say absolutely, it's definitely not a serious threat of legal action. It's a media strategy. But at the beginning of the week, I thought that about the expulsion of these Democrats from the Tennessee State House. Now, granted, that wasn't a legal proceeding per se. That was legislative in nature, and they're sort of the final authority on that, though there could certainly be lawsuits about it. But I have a feeling it will come down to the legislative prerogative to determine who will constitute the membership of the legislative body. If the Tennessee Constitution is parallel to the federal one. But I'm just going to put that out there that sometimes the things that we think, well, that's just a media strategy because it doesn't have any basis in fact. It can't happen. It's too outlandish. Sometimes those things will happen anyway. Especially at the county level where there's just less scrutiny and less of a check against idiot locals. So, all right. So poor Ricky is probably having a fit listening to this much stuff about Donald Trump, but it's really about so many other people. But Donald Trump infects every story, and that must be really annoying and dismaying. So let's use other stories that will annoy and dismay her, because pretty much all this stuff eventually comes back to Trump in one way or another. However, let's see. Maybe now is a good time to take a break then and bring you one of our pre-recorded stories, which both touch on similar themes. But let's see. Maybe we'll use Rosalind's here because there's a little bit of a segue from the crazy in local parties or local versions of the Republican Party. It's all, pretty much nationally crazy as it is. But just taking a deep dive into what's happening in Michigan and illustrating just how crazy they are. And it's a special and different brand, I guess, of crazy, but it's similar. And I guess the segue is not hard. In Tennessee, of course, where you might expect them to use their crazy to say, let's purge black people from public life where possible. Up in Michigan, the approach is slightly different. And I mean, you do find this even down south occasionally, where they do something crazy like that. And then people say, it's making it difficult to recruit people of color to our party. Isn't there someone we could adopt who's, maybe slightly crazy or doesn't know exactly what the hell's going on or doesn't appear oriented to this planet, for instance, who might be willing to say that they're a Republican. And then we could point to them and say, we're not exclusionary. See how inclusive we are? There's a black person running as a Republican. But, if you take a step back, if you're a little bit skeptical about it, and let's say you live in Georgia and you are African American, and then you say, should I consider the Republican Party to be inclusive of people of color because they have one running for Senate, let's say. And you might say, is it crazy to think after all these years, if you said everything else aside, is it crazy to think after all these years that they might have returned to their roots as the party of Lincoln? Let's give it a shot. What do they have on offer here? It's a black person speaking up. Let's listen. And then that person is Herschel Walker, and you say, I see what's going on here. They found, a ridiculous caricature of a black person, I guess, here. Or maybe not at all, just an unbalanced and not very smart and connected person at all, and held them up. And if they win, great, because he doesn't really know particularly well what he's going to do, but we can hand him the candidate in a box talking points, and he'll do that. And he's doing that right now, so I think it's going to work. But in the meantime, it also is kind of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge to the white power center of our party. Yes, we realize what we're doing here. We did have to put up a black candidate, and I know that will offend some of you, but remember, we've put up someone ridiculous who's probably going to reflect poorly on the community, plus is controlled by white power talking points and is willing to parrot them. So let's try that. Well, there's this Michigan place. Maybe you've heard of it. And, as it turns out, they're taking a similar tack, except this time they've actually handed some measure of power to, what's her name? The new state Republican Party chairperson, whose name is the alliterative Christina Caramo. And she, too, is a person of color, and she, too, not reflecting on either people of color or the Republican Party particularly in a particularly positive fashion. And we'll let Rosalind McGregor, who's on the ground she's all right. Don't worry, she's not on the ground like she's injured. She lives there in Michigan. That's what I mean. And files this report.
Good morning, David. Recently, I've shared with your listeners information about well-run Christian nationalist efforts to take over Michigan county-level governments. Today, I'd like to change focus and bring you news about the disarray in the statewide Republican Party. You may recall that the selection of the new leader of the Michigan GOP was contentious and only ended because the rented conference center was going to kick them out for seriously overstaying their time. Michigan Republicans picked Christina Caramo, an enthusiastic conspiracy fan who recently went all Godwin's law over Michigan Democrats' introduction of gun control bills. Caramo is certain that globalists, folks in cahoots with the World Economic Forum, are ready to subjugate America in a purported quest for world domination. The WEF has an office in Troy, Michigan, near Ford Motor Company, one of only 15 in the U.S. Caramo has also alienated the big money donors who keep the GOP engine running. For example, Caramo is using the Macomb County office in a strip mall instead of the big Republican headquarters blocks away from the state capitol. The building's rent is only $1 a year, but the GOP can't pay the utilities. Quote, "It's the defeat of the big money establishment in Michigan," said Mark Fortin, who led a convention revolt to retake control of the Macomb County Republican Party last August. "The DeVos family and all of them, they've been running this doggone state for decades and running it into the ground and making deals with the Democrats." Unquote. The ultra-wealthy donors who formed the Republican Party's financial bedrock for decades have already stopped giving. The political professionals that devoted years to building up party infrastructure are keeping their distance too. Quote, "I just don't see how they raise any money because none of the major donors are going to help them, and they don't have the mechanisms for raising small dollars," Jason Rowe, a political consultant and longtime Republican delegate, said. "I think this is going to get really bad really fast." Longtime political reporter Tim Skubik and team posted recently, quote, "Now there is chatter that Betsy DeVos and her husband and others are discussing forming a shadow party while ignoring the new party chair whose policies they don't like." This is appalling. Is this what politics is about? Keeping 4 or 5 people happy at all times to get their money at the expense of all the other people of this state? Caramo said, "I'm a populist. It's about putting people first," unquote. For those who like process, you might like to know that the reason the Michigan GOP is in this situation is because of last year's major push to add precinct delegates. Quote, "For years, the vast majority of Republican delegates' seats sat empty, but after the 2020 election, far-right activists undertook an effort to recruit America First precinct delegate candidates to fill the spots. Most prominent group, My Precinct First, offered literature and training materials to prospective delegates. They reported the overall number of Republican delegates increased from 3,400 in 2020 to 8,500 in 2022. Chris Arndt, a precinct delegate from Eaton County, said, "The more delegates the American First type crowd or MAGA or even Tea Party brings in, the more the other kind of people tend to say, 'I want nothing to do with this,' and then they just leave," Arndt said. "It left a vacuum." "The party was never hijacked," Arndt said. "They left the keys in the car and the engine was running and the doors were unlocked. Somebody got in the car and drove off," unquote. That's my segment for today. At the state level, Michigan Republicans are in disarray. Republican candidates may have to go to outside sources to fund their 2024 campaigns because of the crazy conspiracy-minded GOP leadership. For example, will be the big race for Senate as Democrat Debbie Stabenow has announced her retirement. Republicans have wanted that seat for a long time. So that's my time for today. Back to you, David. Rosalind McGregor signing off.
Thank you, Rosalind. And a great point actually made by, did I have it right? Chris Arendt, his point. That's an interesting way of putting it. The Republican Party wasn't hijacked. They left the keys in the car and the door unlocked, and somebody else drove away with the party. And yeah, that's pretty amazing. And the disarray is interesting too. I guess I'm kind of glad that it makes even the DeVosses uncomfortable and upset. But, and what a line too from Caramo, right? Did I have the name? I should have listened more closely to the pronunciation, but, the claim of populism. It's an interesting, it's a great distraction, right? We don't have to listen to these DeVosses anymore. And I mean, it's kind of good, but they're just going to switch billionaires and find another one who's crazier, and finding people that are billionaires who are crazier than the DeVosses. It's not easy to do, but I guess, once you come up with one, it's not great. Won't help the party any. And that's fine because I didn't really want to help their party. Okay. So almost time for our next break. We'll get to, the recorded segment from Darwin a little bit later on. But maybe I'll use this time in between now and the top of the hour break to bring you up to date on all of the fantastic people who have joined us as Patreon donors or who have boosted their pledges on Patreon lately, who I haven't yet called out for thanks that they are due. And let's see, it goes back to St. Patrick's Day. All of this. David Ratz, R-A-A, it's double A-T-Z. Do I have the pronunciation right? I know it could be a sensitive one, but joins us as a new patron on St. Patrick's Day. I guess he was really feeling the spirit that day. Or maybe, were you drunk? Is everything okay? I don't know. I mean, if so, I'll buy you another drink. How about that? Also, Seth Chipman, who joined us on the 27th of March, just 10 days later, as a new booster. Matthew Williams, the following day on the 27th as well. And it looks like I'm cramming in the dates here. But right around the same time, also, all I have here in the sign up on Patreon is the screen name of A Rural Noise, which I like that. That's a pretty good one. And, the Rural Noise chiming in with some extra Patreon support. We appreciate it very much. And in the last day or two, Sumiko, also the only, identifier that we have. You're all entitled to maintain your privacy. And Stephen E. Brown, who already was a contributor who has boosted his pledge in support of the KITM project, as it were, 20 years in the making here. But thank you to all who have joined and boosted their pledges. We really appreciate it. It makes a big difference in what we do. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So as we exited, we may have been cut off by the break, but all I was saying was it does make a big difference when those of you who contribute to supporting the show chime in this way. And I was saying, well, it makes a big difference in what we do. And, another way of looking at it is it makes no difference whatsoever in what we do. And, why would I say that? And the answer is, the way that we do things, the things that we do, okay, well, we still, I think, pretty much are relatively independently guided on all this. I mean, we are who we are. We're Democrats, and nothing's likely to change that anytime soon. But what I guess I mean is, one, your financial support gives us the ability to remain independent and not take editorial direction from any outside authority or corporate authority, though that was never really likely to happen. Really, honestly, being bought up by corporate radio, I mean, yeah, it's not that we're not for sale, it's just that nobody's buying. But this helps. What it really means, though, by saying that it allows us to do what we do, is to say that it makes it, one, viable to do and not just simply be an exercise which I spend money on Libsyn and pay them to host the podcast and we just throw money out the window all the time. But rather, one, we're able to pay for the podcast hosting. Two, we're able to pay at least some small stipend to Scott Anderson for pitching in every day with a couple hours work in putting together the show summary, which is just, I don't know, it's just a thing that by the time we get around to that stage of the day, I've done the show. We've done it for 2 hours. I'm kind of done with it. I didn't really want to continue working on it. I need to turn my attention elsewhere. And I can do that because Scott's able to take care of that work, and Scott's able to, justify doing that work at home by saying, well, one, it's something I like to help out with, and two, there's a couple of dollars in it, so what the heck, let's do it. And that wouldn't be possible. It wouldn't be possible to justify the time spent on the show here if there wasn't at least something that made it worth their time. Plus, psychologically, it makes me get up and do the show. I'm sure, like with anything, you probably experience the same thing. There are days where I say, I do want to talk about the news, but I don't want to, produce the whole show and do all these things. And, I'd like to just have some breakfast now, or I'd like to sleep in. And it does work. It's good guilt. The money is, because I say, people have contributed. You need to get up and do the show. They're expecting to hear it. And besides, you like doing it anyway, if you just admit to yourself. So go ahead and do it. And I do, and it's a pleasure. And it's that much more of a pleasure when I feel like I'm delivering on part of a bargain. So to the extent that the stakes of the bargain are higher, I feel more compelled to do the show. How about that? So you can add to the guilt that drives the show by showing your appreciation for it. And I show my appreciation for you by reading out the names and hoping against hope that I'm actually pronouncing them correctly. Okay. Thank you, everybody. And we move on to, let's see, the next segment, the other things that we have in store to share with you. Let's see, shall we jump off on a different path? Yes, why not? We probably should have talked about this earlier in the week. We ordinarily would have talked about it with Joan probably on Tuesday. I'm sure that if all's going well and she's feeling well on next Tuesday, we'll be talking about this. But we need to catch up on it. What the hell's going on with Republicans and their latest stupid round of let's threaten to crash the economy with the debt ceiling crisis? What is happening? And the answer is, I don't know, because they don't know. And Joan, no doubt, has been writing a lot about this, and we had a story at the ready, and we would have heard about it directly from her on Tuesday, but maybe next Tuesday. In the meantime, I'll offer you this piece. It's an opinion piece, though. It's really might as well just be straight up reporting. David Firestone wrote in the New York Times on April 3rd under the headline, "Republicans Can't Agree on a Path Out of Their Own Debt Crisis," which is just true and factual and doesn't need to be expressed as an opinion, but I guess it's the balance of the story that must contain the opinion, or else the only other alternative explanation for why you include it in the opinion section is that the New York Times editorial management is incompetent, stupid, or malicious. And there are a lot of people who believe that one or all three of those things might be true. So anyway, David Firestone, though, is a member of the editorial board, so I guess he agrees with the policy, or is outnumbered 10-1 on the editorial board. I don't know. Anyway, the point is that the headline is true and needs to be discussed and explained. So here's what he has to say. "It's been obvious for months that Republicans in the House of Representatives intend to lead the country toward a calamitous debt ceiling crisis in order to get their way on spending." And I mean, it is obvious, and I think that's the sort of thing that you and I consider fact, but the hand-wringers at the editorial board of the New York Times say, that sounds like an opinion. It's been obvious for months. I've been blind to it for months, so maybe other people are too. Or I'm professionally obligated to remain blind to it, and so let's put this in the opinion section. Maybe that's what happened. Anyway, David continues, "Only in the last few weeks, however, has it become clear just how truly chaotic that process will be." No, that's definitely opinion. Republicans, it turns out, don't even know what they want in exchange for dropping their threat to cause a default beyond a fuzzy shared goal of cutting federal spending, whatever that might mean. So again, what's happening here is you're in a situation where, you've taken a hostage. Listen, kill this hostage. We're going to start killing people 1 an hour unless you, and that's where the issue arises. Like ordinarily they say, and by the way, can I just say, in other words, what they're saying is they don't have it together on what their demands are. That's where this is headed to. And I just it occurred to me that the New York Times and others were certain that the Occupy Wall Street movement, for instance, was deeply unserious because, and I mean, it's serious. They were out in the street and occupying sections of Wall Street and making a lot of things, but making things happen, making noise, making people annoyed, all sorts of things were happening, but things were happening. But they were fairly certain that they should be regarded as politically unserious because they didn't have a list of demands. Now, an entire political party of actual elected representatives at the federal level, including the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the third in line to the presidency, a constitutional officer, yada, 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 have no list of demands. They have a hostage. And really, Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street, I guess, had a hostage. The street, the park, essentially. But other than that, and by the way, on balance, like, what's the more dangerous hostage to have? What was it? Zuccotti Park? Or, I don't remember the name. Or the federal debt ceiling, and with it, maybe the World Economic Order. Yeah, that's a larger and more dangerous hostage to hold, and they have no demands. Therefore, they must be considered to be politically unserious. But the New York Times editorial board can't be seen saying the Republican Party is deeply unserious. Only dirty hippies can be yelled at that way. Okay, so we only yell at dirty hippies, not filthy perverts who are pedophiles who accuse everybody else of being filthy, perverted pedophiles. Those people we don't yell at. No, they are serious. They have red ties. That's all there is to it. Short haircuts, red ties, serious, even if they're perverts. Okay. Republicans, it turns out, don't even know what they want in exchange for dropping their threat to cause a default beyond that fuzzy shared goal of cutting federal spending. Even if President Biden and the Democrats were inclined to negotiate with them to lift the debt ceiling, which would be a serious mistake, it's not clear who their negotiating partners would be. The House has become so factionalized, and remember the mischiefs of faction, right? Even the founders said, that's terrible. You're stupid if you go down this path. Okay, let's go down this path. In the name of upholding what the founders wanted, of course, right? But the House has become so factionalized that its leaders cannot speak in one voice. And Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who's supposed to be speaking, by the way, right, in that voice, may not be able to assemble a majority to lift the debt ceiling at all. Now, why is he Speaker? He's Speaker because it is presumed that his once having assembled a majority means he can assemble a majority again. That's why he's the Speaker. But since he can't, maybe he shouldn't be. But how do you get rid of him? A motion to vacate the chair. That'll only, and they're dying for that one. Anyway, you don't want to necessarily pursue that. Anyhow, I don't see how we get there. Who's saying, I don't see how we get there, and what do they mean? I don't see how we get where. I don't see how you get to being able to get an agreement between the Republicans and speaking for a majority of the House and the president in an agreement because it's too factionalized. Who's telling us this? Patrick McHenry, a Republican of North Carolina and been around for a long time and used to be one of the crazies, right? You'd say, oh, one of these crazy bomb-throwing firebrands. Now he's like a staid conservative statesman. Not that he's changed very much. He's aged. Maybe that's enough of a change. But, of course, he's been bypassed entirely by the crazy wing. And the place he occupied then and still occupies now is just not considered crazy anymore because there's murdery trader greens, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, it would never be considered crazy anyway, because again, we're talking about the New York Times and the editorial staff. And so therefore, you're not allowed to say that they're crazy. And then maybe they're sitting there saying, see, with the passage of time, you can see that we were right. Patrick McHenry isn't the crazy one. But I mean, they're just doing the same exercise over and over again, saying that murdery trader Green isn't the crazy one. And then eventually we'll find that there are Republicans elected to Congress who believe that Martian lizard men are among us, et cetera. Oh, she may believe that, but I don't know. I don't know what's supposed to be crazier than her, but try to imagine it. Maybe you can't imagine it. Just accept as truth that there will be someone crazier. And then eventually they'll be talking about elder statesman murdery trader Green, who says, I can't see how we get there. I don't know. These people are too crazy. We'll be there again. Right now, we are where we are with Patrick McHenry saying this. I don't see how we get there. He is not only officially now non-crazy, but he is the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. So by definition, for the paper of record of Wall Street, even more so than the Wall Street Journal, he's not crazy. And here he is. So here he is saying, I don't know how we get there. Also, they note he is a close ally of McCarthy, and continues with his quote. And this is a marked change from where I've been. I don't even see a path. I guess he used to see a path from, in years past when he helped kidnap the economy and hijack it and say, let's not raise the debt ceiling. He was pretty sure he had a path to success. Now he doesn't think so. But, by the way, he's not voting to raise the debt ceiling for nothing anytime soon. So, the ceiling, though, Firestone continues, is a useless legislative construct, I think we can agree with that, actually, that lets lawmakers refuse to borrow money to pay for the deficit spending they already approved. That's a very important concept. We remind everybody of it here on the show, but most people just continue to insist that they don't get it. But, all right, if Congress doesn't raise it, the government goes into default and can't make payments on its obligations, including interest on treasury bonds. That should upset Wall Street. Social Security payments and other essential spending, which would quickly crash the U.S. economy. It generally comes up as an issue only when Republicans control at least one house of Congress, while a Democrat is in the White House. It's a very narrow slice of the situation. It only happens when Republicans control one house, at least, and there's a Democrat in the White House. Because if there's a Republican in the White House and they control one house, they pass the debt ceiling hikes so as not to make trouble for their Republican presidents. If they don't control either house, but there's a Democrat in there, then they don't get to do anything. But all right, now you get the idea. They only care about using this hostage to cut spending when there's a Democrat in the White House to embarrass. So, Republicans are not known to express concern about deficits caused when a president of their own party cuts taxes for the rich, or does anything. It doesn't really matter if it involves a tax cut, but that helps. When the GOP, or GOP as they call them, took control of the House in January, Mr. McCarthy had to meet the demands of a handful of far-right members to get their votes to become Speaker. One of his concessions was a promise not to raise the debt ceiling unless there was an agreement to balance the budget within 10 years. How? By cutting the heart out of the federal government. Because who needs a heart, right? That extreme demand was so unrealistic that it is no longer being seriously discussed by House officials. Achieving balance that quickly without raising taxes would mean that all spending, including for defense, veterans, Social Security and Medicare, etc., would have to be cut by 26%. As even the spending hawks at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget noted earlier this year. Exempting those four categories would require, like if you said, all right, well, we'll cut everything else, just not defense, veterans, Social Security, and Medicare, that would require cutting everything else by 85%. Both levels are unimaginable. But what will replace that ultimatum? So far, there has been a cacophony of proposals from the so-called five families. I've never heard this terminology for them, but I mean, clearly borrowed from mob lore, but that's kind of a funny way of looking at the organization of House Republicans, that they're divided up into crime families. The so-called five families representing different gradations of small government ideology, and I don't think they really even represent that, in the House Republican Conference, all vague and lacking details of what members really want to cut. And by the way, the five families language is linked to a story also in, this one is in the Washington Post, from Adrian Blanco, Mariana Sotomayor, and Hannah Dormido of March 24th. Meet the five families that wield power in McCarthy's House majority. And I guess the five families are supposed to be here. The Problem Solvers Caucus, remember them? The Republican Governance Group, with whom I'm not actually all that familiar. The Republican Main Street Caucus. The Republican Study Committee, I remember them. And, of course, the House Freedom Caucus, who are kooky. And they are of varying sizes, and they have their different leadership displayed here. But if you want to read about that, we'll have to do so separately. Although maybe at some point we would dive into something like that. Maybe next Friday. Anyway, for now, the five families can't agree on what they want in exchange for the hostage's life here. The Republican Study Committee, a prominent group of House conservatives, issued a playbook, as they called it, full of tired ideas like, well, why don't we cut waste, fraud, and abuse? And rolling back recent spending approved by Democrats. Those are their fantastic ideas. The Republican Study Committee. Yeah, we need to cut the budget by 85%, guys. Well, how about waste, fraud, and abuse? All right, that's 2%. What else you got? Okay. The head of the slightly more centrist Main Street Caucus, Dusty Johnson of South Dakota. Never mind how that connotation comes across. Dusty Johnson. Anyway, he has talked about going back to spending levels from 2 years ago without saying which federal programs will be forced to ignore record-setting inflation. The worst, inevitably, was from the MAGA faction known as the House Freedom Caucus, which wants to go back to either 2019 or 2022 spending levels. It's not clear which. Also then allow 1% growth each year and cut $3 trillion. $3 trillion from what it calls the wasteful, woke, and weaponized federal bureaucracy. They want to get the talking points in on that one. The proposal manages to invoke all the favorite phrases from the Trump era without telling people that it will mean drastic reductions to Homeland Security, defense, disaster response, law enforcement, and environmental cleanup, among other vital categories. In other words, by the way, it's defund the police. This is the endless failure of the modern Republican Party. Cutting spending as a concept might sound attractive to many voters until you explain what you're actually cutting and what effect it would have. They cut taxes so they can then rail about the resulting deficits. But they don't want to discuss how many veterans won't get care, or whose damaged homes won't get rebuilt, or which dangerous products won't get recalled. That's why there is still no official budget statement from the House GOP, because its different factions can't agree on how open they should be about the results. The details of austerity are unpopular, and it's easier to just issue fiery news releases. In early March, the Biden administration issued a 2024 budget that forthrightly declared how it planned to reduce the deficit, with $5 trillion in tax increases on the rich and on large corporations over the next decade. It would spend more money on health care for the poor and uninsured, child care, Pell Grants and free community college, climate resilience, the military and alliances like NATO. The White House proposal Hasn't a chance, of course, as long as Republicans control the House. But at least it represented a clear statement of principles and priorities, unlike the mush trickling out of the GOP caucus. To mask his chamber's dysfunction, McCarthy issued a letter on Tuesday. I guess it would be a week ago. Tuesday, what date are we talking about here? Oh, yeah, maybe it was last Tuesday, the week before, that tried to put the blame on Mr. Biden. Yes, why isn't the House Republican Conference issuing a budget? Biden, because he's not in this conference. The speaker accused the president of being, quote, completely missing in action, except for the plan that he issued, on debt ceiling negotiation, and said he remained willing to talk about raising the ceiling in exchange for, let's say, cuts like reducing excessive non-defense spending, no details, of course, and strengthening work requirements for unspecified federal benefits, although why that cuts the deficit, I have no idea. He undoubtedly meant Medicaid and food stamps, but he didn't choose to put that in writing. And even if he did, like I said, Medicaid and food stamps are costing us, let's say, hypothetically, $1 billion a year. Well, I know. How about we have work requirements? All right. So if we have work requirements, how much will it cost us? $1 billion a year, but people will be working. All right. But people working is good, I guess. But what about the deficit? Oh, no, it doesn't do anything for that. Oh, crap. But it does punish poor people. All right, well, that's good. Throw it in there. Anyway, he also put his party's energy and border policies on the table, knowing he cannot achieve them through any tactic other than hostage taking. That's interesting, too. But Mr. Biden says he won't let the government and the economy be blackmailed. And he has adamantly rejected the demand that he discuss terms for raising the ceiling. He says it has to be raised cleanly with no conditions, just as it was 3 times during the Trump administration. The last time a Democrat negotiated with Republicans over the ceiling was in 2011, when President Barack Obama capitulated and agreed to a deal that created the notorious Super Committee to agree on cuts and imposed a stark sequester of spending when the committee couldn't agree. Almost everyone hated that deal, and Mr. Obama vowed never to negotiate again, an important principle adopted by his vice president. That doesn't mean Mr. Biden shouldn't negotiate about the budget and spending, a separate process that is part of the normal give and take between the White House and Congress, but he can't do that under the threat of economic catastrophe. And even Republicans are starting to wonder how they will avert it. Tom Cole of Oklahoma, chairman of the House Rules Committee, said a few days ago that several House members will never vote for any debt ceiling increase, even if we gave them everything they wanted. That's true. Mr. McHenry said he had never been more pessimistic about reaching an agreement. Democrats say privately that with the debt ceiling deadline probably arriving this summer, that's a reminder of where we are in all this, they are counting on mounting pressure from financial markets, already jittery from the recent banking crisis, as well as business lobbyists to persuade enough Republicans to join Democrats in ending the threat at the last minute. Maybe, but with the radical mindset that now pervades the House, it's hard to count on that. In the end, the best solution is to eliminate the debt ceiling charade once and for all. There are bills in Congress to do so, though few Republicans would support them. And there was a strong argument during the Obama years to test the constitutionality of the ceiling in court, since it appears to violate the 14th Amendment. I think Armando believes in that as well. A tactic still worth trying. Mr. Biden, however, has shown no interest in pursuing that path and seems to be hoping that this year Republicans will finally learn that the debt ceiling is not a tool for leverage because the cost of using it is too high. The country can only brace itself and hope he's right. And I guess that's what we're stuck with. I can kind of see the Biden approach to that in the sense that it's like, well, if we challenge it in court, we might solve the problem of getting past the blockade, but it kind of, in a way, lets Republicans off the hook, right? Once we've convinced everybody, now you see that the entire economy could fall apart if they do this. You should actually think they're bad at governance and think poorly of them as governors and don't elect them anymore. But it does run the risk of crashing the economy. And the choice is between, well, we should let them hang around and crash the economy, or we should learn how bad they really are. And if we solve the problem for them by taking the whole thing to court and pointing out that it can't happen, and then, Republicans at that point say, we want to that. We can still run around and promise our people, I don't care what the courts say. We should do it because cutting spending and and people cheer. But then they know that they can't really crash the economy and the courts will save them. But it is something of a dangerous game. All right. Well, let's see. Time almost for our next break. And in fact, here comes the music. And in the next segment, we got to remember to get back around to Darwin's recorded segment, and we'll share that at some point in the last segment, and then throw in some sort of Friday curveball for you, just to give you something new and interesting to think about. And I got some suggestions for what that might be, but we'll give it some thought over the next 2 minutes or so as we take a break away from the mic. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. Yes, right. I wanted to squeeze in a couple of other items here before perhaps throwing it to the curveball stuff. One, since we were taking so many contributions from others to include in the show, I wanted to add an observation that Scott made the other day it was in fact on Wednesday. I know this because the text is still sitting here. And I thought he made an interesting observation that we should throw into the mix. Remember the discussion we had? I hinted that we were going to get around to this eventually. I'm glad I remembered. The discussion or the mention of Trump becoming confused, probably intentionally, about the Nixon case in which the Nixon estate was reimbursed for the seizure of the Watergate tapes, and that Trump was pretty sure in his discussion of the issue. Was this also with Sean Hannity? That that he had the right to take everything that he took and hid away, even the classified documents and even the top secret stuff that he hid away at Pervalago for several reasons. One, of course, there's the initial idea that was in his head that he read in the newspaper once, probably during the George W. Bush administration, that the president could instantly declassify things just by thinking that he did, or whatever. That was his version of the explanation. And so therefore the things he had weren't classified at all because he had once thought about declassifying them. It was after the fact, after he was caught with them, that he decided he was going to declassify them, and he wasn't president then anyway. But then somebody told him, oh no, you had to have had that thought when you were president. So he says, oh, I think I did have that thought when I was president. So obviously that's not really going to fly because that was, constructed after the fact. And even if it hadn't been, that's not the way it works. Similarly, I heard that Nixon's estate sued because of the Watergate tapes. So imagine that's worth $18 million. So and he had two theories on this. And the one I explained the other day, he's wrong about. And he's wrong about the one that Scott explains. But Scott's might get more at the heart of where Donald Trump's brain really is on this. I thought, well, it's not hard to believe that Donald Trump would misunderstand this thing. I saw where Nixon's family sued and they got $18 million. So if they got $18 million, that must mean that the court thought that those things belonged to him. They wouldn't have awarded the estate $18 million. And yeah, they didn't actually give the estate $18 million, but they wouldn't have awarded anybody $18 million if there wasn't an agreement that the court, on the court's part, that, well, clearly there was property that belonged to Nixon and it was taken from him. And that's why we're giving his estate money. And that was true as far as it went. But first, Matthew Rigdon pointed out, and we talked about that and then read a little bit from one of the fact check places. Well, okay. Yes, there was a property interest. Nixon had a property interest in those tapes because at that point, at the point where he took them with him and the government needed to seize them back in order to use as evidence against him in forcing an impeachment trial or forcing him to resign instead of facing an impeachment trial. At the time, those records were considered the personal property of the president. And then it occurred to Congress that maybe that wasn't a great idea, and that it led to a lot of bad things, and that why don't we say that from now on all of the presidential records are government property, and the presumption is that it belongs to the government, and in the cases where a president thinks it ought to belong to them, let them make the case to reverse that presumption, show that it's purely personal. And so the law that was used to reach the conclusion that Nixon had a property interest in his tapes doesn't exist in the same form anymore. There's now a new law that says, no, papers like this are not the property of the person. They are the property of the government and the presidency, and you're thinking of something that doesn't work anymore. It basically, I mean, I don't want to compare the crimes involved, but it would be like saying, well, like bringing a Fugitive Slave Act motion or a case in court now and saying, well, these fugitive slaves ought to be returned to me. And it's like, no, we don't have that as a law anymore. People don't own people anymore. No, you're not going to get any compensation for it. That's crazy. That hasn't been the law for a long time. No comparison between the crimes, slavery obviously being the greater of the two, but, it's a bad example in the sense that it will get people angry about it. I'm not making that comparison. So, let's erase that example. I don't know. It'd be like, something else. What else? What have we abolished lately? That makes good sense. Well, I think you all get the point. The point is that it was no longer the law, and the $18 million things arose from a situation that wasn't possible anymore because it didn't exist. That condition of law didn't exist. But as I said, I think Scott makes a more interesting observation, and I'll just cull it here from the text that he sent me. It says, I'm not sure enough consideration is given here to Trump being an idiot, which is hard to believe because that's my first consideration in anything. But sometimes he's a bigger idiot than I understand. So this is what he means. It's not necessarily just the case, I guess I'll say, that Trump wasn't up on the current state of the law and doesn't understand the idea that laws change and that something that was concluded in 1994 based on what was law in 1974 doesn't necessarily mean it's going to come out the same way for you in 2023 when the law hasn't been that way since forever. But there's more idiocy even than that, right? I'm not sure enough consideration is given to Trump being an idiot, Scott says. Trump thought that he had valuable stuff, that he took the things he took because he thought, well, it's top secret and in some cases classified. And it's important to people. Well, one thing, he likes to show it to donors to look important. But in addition, he might have thought, I'm taking a valuable hostage. The government obviously has an interest in this stuff because it's classified. But don't worry, because Nixon got paid. Trump thought he had valuable stuff. And when he was called to return it, he became even more confident of that is to say, of how valuable it was. They wouldn't come to try to get it if it wasn't valuable to them. He figured, both because he misunderstood the state of the law, he misunderstood the meaning of the Nixon precedent, he misunderstood everything. He figured the price would go up the longer he held on. When legal action was threatened, he personally sorted out the good stuff. He saw in the past someone had offered Nixon $2 million. Nixon asked for $200 million, of course. The government ended up offering $2 million, and the settlement was he got 18. Trump figured he could beat that. He thought he was still bargaining when the FBI showed up and made it clear, oh no, there's no bargaining going on here. You have no property interest in this whatsoever. We're simply going to take it. And Trump thought, well, when they took it from Nixon, they ended up giving him $18 million. And my stuff is so important. And with inflation and all of that, I could only end up getting more. So fine, go ahead. I'll sue you. And he just didn't understand that they had changed the law in between. And he has no case. And he still doesn't. He still refuses to believe it. He still goes on Sean Hannity and saying, I have the right. I have the right to take stuff. I know I have the right because Nixon had the right and he was president and I'm president. So that's it. That's all there is. Well, what if the law changes? What if the law, what? I don't, but yeah, I think Scott's got a great point there. I think that really could be it. He thought this was a game. He thought this was a negotiation. Yeah, sure, they asked me for it, but that just shows that they want it. Well, now they've subpoenaed you for it. But that just shows that they're really serious about how much they want it. That just goes to show how valuable it is. The value's going up, don't you see? Well, now the FBI is here to seize it. Well, I feel like I'm not sure about that one. And, yeah. But anyway, it's a great point, and I wanted to bring it up and make sure that it was on record before the weekend came. Now I better break and make sure that Darwin Darko's latest submission is also on the record. Why don't we get to that? He'll set it all up for you, but it comes from a familiar source. All right, I'll set it up for you a little bit too. Michael Harriot, who he follows on Twitter, and I began following as well, because he makes great points about a lot of things. And this is one of them. And basically a tweet thread of Harriot's that he thought required our attention. And I agree, and so here we go. Let's roll it.
Hey there, David. Hey there, KITM family. Darwin Darko here, reading a Twitter thread from Michael Harriot. He's at Michael Harriot. I went ahead and titled it because I think it deserves to be titled. This is just a real great string of thoughts, and I titled it The Allegory by Michael Harriot. Once upon a time, a dynasty ruled an empire. For generations, the emperor's leadership went unchallenged because everyone knew the emperor was the wisest, strongest warrior in the empire. How did they know? The emperor's clothes. They didn't have to pass an emperor SAT test. There was no single elimination emperor tournament, but the emperor only wore purple. The original emperor had a fleet of ships that harvested sea snails that produced purple dye, but the snails had gone extinct. This basically made purple clothes rare and expensive. You had to inherit purple or either have enough to buy it. But in empire schools, the history textbooks only had pictures of people wearing purple. To get a good job or attend a formal event, you had to wear at least a dash of purple. But purple wasn't the emperor's color. The smart, wise people who wore a little purple, people weren't necessarily emperors. And if you were privileged enough to be born into a family that already had purple, it didn't make you smart, strong, or wealthy. But if all the smart, strong people wore purple and purple was the emperor's color, then logically the emperor must be the strongest, wisest of them all. It made sense until an emperor named Barack Obama became emperor. He was pretty smart and reasonably strong, but he wasn't born with any purple. The entire empire was shook. They said he wasn't a real emperor or questioned his purple certificate. They claimed he got it from an African violet. The empire went berserk and summoned a real emperor whose only qualification was that he had a bunch of purple outfits. The people didn't care that the new emperor was dumb and weak. He had the most purple, so he was the only person who could make the empire purple again. He damn near ruined the empire, but the people who had a little bit of purple didn't care. They wanted a ruler who wore purple. And when a scholar used visual theory to explain why one color had influenced the empire, the emperor called it color revisionist theory, CRT. Soon, any scientific or historical evidence that said purple was just a visual construct was denounced as a war on the king's empire, or woke, by magenta-opposed brainwashers, a mob. The woke mob was just anti-fuchsist, who wanted to make purple dressers uncomfortable. So the emperor banned teachers from teaching how the emperor's dynasty used dye to gain power. And kids who inherited their purple started to believe they were better. They only knew a purple-washed history, so they still thought people who didn't have purple must be less hardworking, smart, or perhaps they were raised in a culture that didn't value purple. And when anyone managed to acquire a little purple, their success was used as proof. Look at Tyler Periwinkle, they'd say, or Opal Winfrey is proof that anyone can get some purple if they worked hard and educate themselves. I don't see color. Now, here's the thing. The people with the purple actually believed they were not violet supremacists. They feared CRT, even though they hadn't studied it. They had learned about wokeness from teachers in pro-purple schools with purple-centric textbooks. So if purple meant you were smart and strong, and the emperor wore all purple, then the emperor was the smartest and the strongest. Well, here's the thing. The emperor knew that no one really believed in him. He knew he wasn't smart and strong. He understood purple gave him and the people the illusion of power and authority. After all, if purple didn't denote superiority, they would actually have to be superior. He even bragged that he could walk down the street naked and people would believe he was wearing purple. And he was right. He could do it because they were dumb. So when a new emperor came along, the dumb people were like, "That's not my emperor. Where's his purple?" They refused to accept the new emperor just because the old emperor kept wearing purple. The conflict got so bad, the entire empire was nearly destroyed. The way to solve the problem was to expose the propaganda that was spreading throughout the land. Now, some people in the empire disagreed. They thought that platforming misinformation was a mistake. They said it validates lies and helps normalize hate. Others disagreed. They said supremacists and extremists should be exposed for the harm and hatred their dumb ideas caused. The only way it would work is if they found someone smart enough to dismantle misleading disinformation. They needed someone who was strong and respected enough to push back on the lies and revisionist history with facts and truth. This tweet is not about Leslie Stahl or Joe Rogan or Tucker Carlson or No Jumper. No Jumper is a podcast you might have never heard of. This tweet is about Make Believe Empire. When everybody was talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene, I thought, why is everyone crying before they even see the interview? Now, I haven't watched 60 Minutes in over a decade, but I still believe it was strong and smart. Why? Because I kind of believe in that purple too. This tweet is about me. So, standing ovation for Michael Harriot and what I am titling The Allegory. So, hopefully you enjoyed that and the meaning didn't get lost on too many purple-loving people. Put it that way. So that's all I gotta say on that one. I appreciate you guys listening, and back to you, David.
Okay. Well, I think I can take the clues away from that one, but that is interesting. It was a little bit of a twist at the end of that. I could see where we were going, but then, oh yeah, a little bit of a reminder that, you need to reevaluate your own, perceptions of the situation, even if you think you got it all straight to begin with. So yeah, interesting. And I guess kind of maybe, well, the tweet is a little bit about Leslie Stahl. I have a feeling that might have motivated it, but okay. And I think we all get it. And there's some historical reality, of course, built into all of that. There really was a weird thing about purple. So, and it really did come originally in many instances from sea snails that were harvested. There's a whole history behind that. But okay, interesting and a great Friday edition, even though it's been waiting several days to get on the air. Thanks to Darwin for sending that one along. All right, let's see. Maybe a few more weird stories that we might be able to fit in the theme of closing out with the weird stuff on Friday. And gosh, I don't know which one to go with first. There are two competing interesting stories. Let's try this one. I just thought this was a weird thing because of the source, that is to say, the authorship was unusual, and certainly the headline is an eye grabber, and it's also being presented as one of those visually rich things that they have going on over at the Washington Post that makes it awkward and difficult to scroll past. But here's the title: How to Rig an Election. What? With deadly racist consequences. Okay, well, usually like totally rigging outcomes of elections, yeah, there's going to be some dangerous consequences. And I guess these are deadly and racist. What are we talking about? One, the subject matter turns out to be interesting. It's not the most current elections. And two, who wrote it and why is that interesting? The answer is Tom Hanks, the one you're thinking of when I say Tom Hanks, and Jeffrey Robinson, who might be the one you're thinking of when I say Jeffrey Robinson, but I have no idea who you might be thinking of. I'll tell you. Tom Hanks is the one we think. Actor, filmmaker, author. And Jeffrey Robinson is founder and executive director of the Who We Are Project, about which I know nothing, but we get some sense of where he's coming from here. Let's see. Well, the two of them collaborated on a new animated documentary. And guess what? It's called How to Rig an Election. But guess what? It's talking about something different. It's the subtitle here is The Racist History, yes, of the 1876 presidential contest. Ooh, maybe we better do some learning here. You can watch the film, as it says here, exclusively with Post opinions, and then join them for a Post Live conversation, which actually took place yesterday, so your chance to do it is gone. I guess I should have told you about this earlier, but you could probably go back and watch it, and you can certainly watch the documentary, and maybe you'll want to after you hear about this. Recent efforts, it begins, to erase black history, yes, have a lot in common with the slogan of the totalitarian regime in George Orwell's 1984, who controls the past, controls the future. Who controls the present, controls the past. Right? We all know about this one. It's an effective strategy, and in the United States, it has been especially so when it comes to discussions of black history, which, of course, is probably why they want to eliminate discussion of black history wherever they can, even when they're just making tiny inroads and filling in the gaps that have been whitewashed for so many decades already, like in the AP Black History curriculum, for instance, not to mention everywhere else that they've opposed. Anyway, if the past contradicts your narrative about the present and the future, just erase it. Now, we've all heard about different instances of that happening. Most prominently, I think for myself, hearing about the various massacres of black citizens that have taken place over the years, alongside the shameful history of lynching and Jim Crow laws, etc. But the outright massacres just aren't talked about very much and not taught. And when you learn about them, you're like, how could it possibly be that happened? Because that's crazy. And murder, just on a mass scale, how can that be? And B, when it did happen, okay, crazy things happened, but certainly you would have heard about it. And when you find out that they're just purposely not telling you about it, it's kind of infuriating. But it's pretty, it illustrates the point. Well, as we say, right, it's been an effective strategy and they have done it. But here's another example. The election of 1876. Now, we don't hear very much about it, but we know that there would have been an election in 1876, and we know who won it, but there's no discussion of this context for it. Just like, it was one of our elections. It was 1876. That's 100 years after 1776. And, so cool, centennial, right? But post-Civil War, I don't know, something happened. Let's find out. Take the presidential election of 1876, which was resolved by the Compromise of 1877, which is interesting because the election was in 1876. How long did it take them to get to a compromise to settle it? And why did they need one? I thought all the controversial elections in this country were the last couple of them, the two. Now, if you don't remember the details, you're not alone. So don't feel bad, but learn, right? This pivotal event is scarcely more than a footnote in most U.S. history classes, but its narrative provides lessons we need to fight the onslaught of truth-canceling legislation being introduced across the nation and already implemented in Florida. We know what you're talking about here. In the decade following the end of the Civil War, the United States was barely reunited. More American combatants had died in that war than would die in either World War I or World War II. Families were healing from the trauma of relatives fighting on opposite sides. In an effort to integrate 4 million newly freed enslaved people into American society, Congress passed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, promising those people the rights and protections of citizenship. This was Reconstruction, our fragile democracy beginning to remake itself as a more participatory system, bringing us closer to the cherished ideal that all people, men, were created equal. During this period, more than 1,500 black men held public office, from the local level up to the U.S. House and Senate. But the post-war reality was not accepted by the Ku Klux Klan and other organized white supremacist groups. Anti-black violence erupted, and federal troops were stationed throughout the South to protect the black American citizens. That's the only thing you could do, the only logical reaction to it. Well, in 1876, the Republican Party, then still the party of Abraham Lincoln, who had kept the Union together, nominated Rutherford B. Hayes to be president. Democrats, then the party of white supremacy, nominated Samuel Tilden. In one of the closest elections in U.S. history, Tilden won the popular contest, but the electoral votes of 4 states were in dispute. Neither side would concede. What happened over the days, weeks, and months that followed became known as the Compromise of 1877. It boiled down to this. Democrats agreed to accept a Republican president if Northern troops were withdrawn from the South. And I don't know whether they went into it with that idea in mind as what they wanted, and they held things hostage. What we could do is we could throw the whole thing into doubt by disputing the validity of the electoral college votes. And while we try and figure out how the hell do we settle this thing, we say, well, I'll tell you what, we'll let you have them if you withdraw federal troops from the South. That would be something. Republicans were well aware that the Confederacy's defeat had not extinguished white domination, yet they acted as if they did not know what Southern leaders would do once the federal troops were withdrawn, which was to violently reestablish a culture of white supremacy across the former Confederate states and beyond. The means were often brutal. Between 1887 and 1921, black people were massacred at Thibodaux, Louisiana, Wilmington, North Carolina, Atlanta, East St. Louis, Illinois, Elaine, Arkansas, Ocoee, Florida, and Tulsa, where even more were disappeared. The Equal Justice Initiative has documented more than 4,000 lynchings of black people in the former Confederate states and the border states of Kentucky between 1877 and 1950. The law was also a useful tool. Literacy tests, grandfather clauses, and poll taxes were among the means used to deprive black citizens of the right to vote. After Louisiana amended its constitution in 1898, the number of black registered voters dropped from just over 130,000 to 1,342 by 1904. Black codes and Jim Crow laws spread across the South and lasted for decades. In agreeing to the Compromise of 1877, U.S. officials were willing to ignore the truth about the past and pretend that racism would not dominate governments across the South. As a result, they sacrificed the rights and liberties of newly freed enslaved people to settle a disputed election and appease Southern resentment. It's critical for us to remember this and to learn from it, because today some elected officials still seem willing to sacrifice the rights of the most marginalized among us to uphold white supremacy. And I know I'm a little bit late in playing the outro music. I hope you and Justice will forgive me. I want to get this in here. The recent removal of AP African American Studies from Florida high schools is not the first attempt to erase uncomfortable truths, and it won't be the last. But we don't have to let such things happen. Taking control of the future begins with our willingness to learn the truth of our history and to share what we have learned with our friends and families and the wider communities in which we live. Then we can start having meaningful conversations about the country we hope to build, a place that we will only reach if we can figure out how to get there together. That is a brief close to a vast topic, but I wanted to bring that to your attention. And of course, perhaps if you watch the documentary, you'll learn even more. It's a good opportunity to do that. And if you're honest about your history, then great. You can try and grow from it together. And Democrats won't hide from the fact that the Democratic Party was once the party of slavery and white supremacy. Then you change, right? So we have. And so still Republicans won't participate in this discussion. They've changed. You can see that that's happened, but they don't want to talk about it. All right. What do you want to talk about? Well, I'll tell you what. If you can't think of exactly what you want to talk about, or you want some ideas, Justice Putnam has some next on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy right here on Netroots Radio.
NetrootsRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Lots more from around the country and around the world, of course, beginning with, let's look. A federal regulatory group voted to officially close the king salmon fishing season along much of the West Coast. That's going to make a big difference. And, of course, treatment right away of the Tennessee situation. Stay tuned. Listen to them next, and we'll see you next week.